The Interstellar Defense Coalition prided itself on producing the galaxy's finest soldiers, a claim that would have been more impressive if half the species involved hadn't evolved in environments where survival training meant don't accidentally photosynthesize yourself to death. Nevertheless, the IDC training doctrine remained absolute strip-away technology, strip-away comfort, strip-away anything resembling convenience, and what remained would be a warrior tempered by pure adversity. The philosophy sounded profound in recruitment brochures. In practice, it mostly produced soggy, miserable recruits who wondered why they hadn't joined the Postal Navigation Corps instead. Training World KEF-7 exemplified this doctrine with enthusiastic malice. A humid jungle planet where it rained approximately 23 hours per day, KEF-7 featured flora that ranged from mildly poisonous to aggressively carnivorous fauna that considered sentient beings a delightful dietary supplement and an atmospheric humidity level that could generously be described as liquid air. The IDC had established base perseverance here 15 years ago, though established oversold the achievement. 3 prefabricated buildings, a landing pad, and a perimeter fence that kept out precisely nothing constituted the entire installation. The rest was jungle, rain, and character building. Recruit Squad Theta-9 had arrived on KEF-7 6 weeks prior, their enthusiasm inversely proportional to their growing fungal infections. The squad represented the coalition's diversity initiative beautifully: 5 species, 5 completely incompatible biology sets, and 5 increasingly creative complaints about the weather. The Interstellar Defense Coalition considered this a feature, not a bug. If you could survive alongside beings whose body temperature would boil your blood, the logic went, you could handle anything. The logic had clearly never spent 6 weeks in a monsoon with someone whose species communicated partially through pheromones that smelled like rotting cabbage. Corporal Marcus Okonkwo represented humanity in Squad Theta-9, a distinction he accepted with the resigned patience of someone who had stopped being surprised by poor life choices around his 3rd week of basic training. 26 years old, previously employed in agricultural engineering on Mars Colony 12, Marcus had joined the IDC because the recruitment bonus could pay off his student loans. He was beginning to suspect he should have read the contract's fine print more carefully, particularly the section that apparently translated to "We will make you sleep in mud for educational purposes." Still, Marcus maintained the particular brand of cheerful stubbornness that characterized humans who had decided that if they were going to be miserable, they might as well be impressively miserable. His squadmates occupied various points on the misery spectrum. Crix, the Thixian, possessed a chitinous exoskeleton that theoretically should have made him impervious to discomfort, but somehow managed to complain about joint ache with impressive creativity. His species had evolved on a desert world where rain occurred approximately once per decade, which made his assignment to KEF-7 either cosmically ironic or evidence that the IDC assignment officer enjoyed cruelty. Probably both. Crix's compound eyes had developed a permanent expression that suggested he was reconsidering every decision that led to this moment. Torvald the Borak contributed reptilian stoicism to the squad, which meant he complained less frequently, but with considerably more venom when he did. His scales had adapted poorly to constant moisture, developing a green tinge that their medic promised was probably not fatal. Torvald had stopped asking follow-up questions. His species valued honor above comfort, a cultural trait that sounded noble until you spent 6 weeks watching someone be honorably miserable instead of practically comfortable. Plex represented the Velm, an aquatic adjacent species that everyone assumed would thrive in KEF-7's humidity. Everyone was wrong. Velm had evolved in clean, temperature-controlled oceanic environments, not warm swamps that smelled like decomposing vegetation. Plex's gills required specific mineral content water, which Kep7's rainfall decidedly lacked, leaving him perpetually congested and irritable. He communicated through modulated clicking sounds that had recently shifted from conversational to accusatory. Xena, their Quinn squadmate, existed in a state of crystalline disapproval. Her species grew rather than aged, adding new mineral layers annually, which made traditional clothing impossible and rain particularly annoying. Water spotted her facets, requiring constant maintenance to prevent mineral deposits. She had filed 17 formal complaints with Base Command. Base Command had filed them appropriately, which was to say directly into a recycling unit. Lead instructor Vector oversaw Squad Theta-9 with the condescending patience of someone who had seen 300 recruit classes and remained unimpressed by 301. An amphibious Krell, Vector actually enjoyed Kep7's climate, which immediately disqualified him from empathy in the recruits' collective opinion. His teaching philosophy embraced creative suffering. Standard survival training taught recruits to build shelters, purify water, and identify edible plants. Vector's approach involved letting recruits succeed, then destroying their success to see how they handled failure. The IDC called this adaptive resilience training. The recruits called it something else, usually under their breath. Week 6 had proceeded tolerably until the evening. Vector decided tolerability indicated insufficient challenge. Squad Theta-9 had established a functioning camp, complete with adequate shelters constructed from provided tarps, a water purification system, and a food storage area that only occasionally attracted predators. They had achieved something resembling routine. Naturally, this could not stand. The rain began at sunset because Kep7's weather possessed a theatrical sense of timing. Not the usual persistent drizzle, but a torrential downpour that turned the jungle into a vertical river. Squad Theta-9 retreated to their shelters, grateful for waterproof tarps and elevated sleeping platforms. They should have recognized this gratitude as foreshadowing. Vector arrived at 2100 hours with 3 assistant instructors and expressions that promised character development. Phase 2 commences now, he announced, which was instructor speak for your life is about to become significantly worse. The assistants moved through camp with practiced efficiency, confiscating every tarp, every shelter component, every piece of equipment that might conceivably provide comfort or dryness. They worked quickly, leaving Squad Theta-9 standing in the rain, watching their small achievement of civilization disappear into supply crates. Survival does not accommodate convenience, Vector explained, his amphibious physiology entirely comfortable in the deluge. You have relied on provided materials. Now demonstrate adaptation. Sunrise evaluation occurs in 10 hours. Utilize available resources. Improvise. Overcome. Or fail spectacularly, which honestly provides better training footage. The instructor team departed, leaving 5 increasingly wet recruits contemplating their options. Those options appeared limited. Kep7's jungle offered plenty of vegetation, most of it poisonous, structurally unsound, or already occupied by something with too many teeth. The recruits could huddle under broad leaves, which provided approximately the same protection as positive thinking. They could dig into muddy ground, creating holes that would immediately fill with water. They could stand in the rain and contemplate their life choices. Creeks attempted constructing a lean-to from branches, which collapsed immediately, trapping him briefly beneath soaked wood. Torval tried wedging himself between tree roots, achieving minimal coverage and maximum discomfort. Plex simply stood in the rain, clicking miserably, his gills flaring in aquatic distress. Zena found a rocky outcrop that provided maybe 15% shelter, which she defended territorially. Marcus said nothing. He stood for approximately 90 seconds, rain plastering his uniform to his skin, water running down his face, assessing the situation with the methodical patience of someone accustomed to problems. Then he turned and walked into the jungle without explanation or announcement. "Where's the human going?" Creeks asked, water dripping off his antenna. "Probably giving up," Torval suggested. "Humans lack proper survival instincts. Their homeworld is embarrassingly hospitable. Maybe he's found shelter." Plex clicked hopefully. "Or gotten eaten," Zena added. "Should we report this?" They didn't. Reporting felt like admitting defeat, and Squad Theta-9 had developed enough collective pride to prefer suffering together. Besides, the instructors were definitely monitoring via remote sensors. If Marcus encountered actual danger, someone would intervene. Probably. The IDC's safety record was technically acceptable, which meant fatalities remained statistically negligible. The squad settled into miserable waiting, huddled in their inadequate shelters, wondering if morning would bring a human corpse or simply a human failure. Neither option seemed appealing, though at least a corpse would generate enough paperwork to delay further training. Marcus, meanwhile, had already covered 50 meters into the jungle, moving carefully despite the darkness and rain. His helmet light illuminated vegetation in sweeping arcs, as he searched for something specific. Earth's agricultural engineering programs included comprehensive botany training, useful for identifying crops. Also useful, as Marcus was discovering, for identifying crop-adjacent plants on alien worlds. KEF-7's jungle contained remarkable biodiversity, most of it angry, but ecosystems followed patterns. Where there was water, there were moisture-adapted plants. Where there were moisture-adapted plants, there were usually some with structural properties. He found what he needed 15 minutes later, thick stands of reed cane, a bamboo-like plant that grew in dense clusters near water sources. Perfect. Reed cane grew straight, segmented, with fibrous internal structure and a hard external shell. Marcus had worked with similar plants on Mars during agricultural dome construction. Different planet, different evolution, same basic structural principles. He drew his combat knife, standard issue, one of the few items Vector hadn't confiscated, because apparently the instructors drew the line at recruits being completely defenseless. Marcus suspected this represented legal liability more than compassion. He began cutting reed cane at the base, selecting mature stalks between 3 and 4 meters long, avoiding younger growth that lacked structural integrity. The knife cut cleanly through the fibrous material. Good, that meant processing would be manageable. 20 stalks. 30. 40. Marcus worked methodically, stacking cut canes, his movements efficient despite the rain and darkness. His uniform was comprehensively soaked, water squishing in his boots, but discomfort could be addressed after shelter. Priorities mattered. Agricultural engineering taught you that crops didn't care about your feelings, and apparently neither did alien jungles. He dragged the harvested canes back toward camp, choosing a location slightly elevated from where his squadmates huddled. Better drainage. The ground was still mud, but marginally less enthusiastically muddy. Marcus arranged his materials, then began processing. Splitting reed cane required technique. Too much force and the stalk shattered. Too little and nothing happened. Marcus found the rhythm, inserting his knife tip into segment joints, applying pressure, feeling the satisfying crack as stalk split lengthwise. He worked through his pile, creating long flexible strips that could be woven. The fibrous interior separated easily from the hard exterior shell, providing two different materials, rigid structural elements and flexible binding. His grandmother had taught him basket weaving during summers in Nigeria, an old skill she insisted had value despite the objections of a teenager who had wanted to learn programming. "Your fancy computers will break," she had said, whacking his hands with a reed when his weaving pattern failed. Skills remain when tools fail. Marcus, currently surrounded by alien jungle in torrential rain, mentally apologized for every eye roll. Grandma had been right. Grandma was always right, a universal constant apparently unchanged by interstellar travel. He began weaving panels, creating a simple over-under pattern that locked strips together. The technique created water-resistant surfaces as overlapping layers directed rainfall outward rather than through. Each panel measured roughly 1 meter square, large enough to be useful, small enough to remain manageable. Marcus worked steadily, his hands remembering patterns even in darkness, muscle memory translating across species and star systems. 1 panel. 3. 5. The pile grew. Marcus's fingers ached, developing blisters that would definitely hurt tomorrow, but tomorrow was tomorrow's problem. Tonight required shelter. He constructed a simple A-frame structure using the remaining whole stalks, lashing them together with flexible inner fiber. The frame stood approximately 1.5 meters tall, long enough to accommodate his body length, wide enough to prevent claustrophobia. He attached panels to the frame, overlapping them shingle style, ensuring water would run down and off rather than accumulating. The bottom panels extended past the frame, creating eaves that directed water away from his sleeping area. Marcus added a floor platform using flat panels, elevating it above the mud, using short stalk segments as supports. Drainage mattered. Sleeping in standing water was technically possible, but practically miserable. The entire construction took 4 hours. 4 hours of cutting, processing, splitting, weaving, assembling, adjusting. 4 hours of rain and darkness and increasing exhaustion. But when Marcus finally crawled inside his improvised shelter, the difference was immediate. Dry. Not completely dry, because apparently that was impossible on Kef 7, but substantially drier than standing in a monsoon. The woven panels held, water running off in small streams, the elevated platform keeping him above the mud. It smelled like fresh vegetation and accomplishment. Marcus wrapped himself in his emergency blanket, another item Vector had mercifully left them, and closed his eyes. He could hear the rain hammering against his woven shelter, could hear his squad mates somewhere nearby, clicking and rustling miserably, could hear the jungle's nighttime sounds filtering through the downpour. But he was dry, or close enough, and that made all the difference. He slept. Morning arrived with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting specifically to reveal embarrassment. The rain continued, because of course it did, though diminished to a persistent drizzle. Squad Theta-9 emerged from their various inadequate shelters, looking like drowned examples of their respective species. Crix's exoskeleton had developed concerning water spots. Torval's scales showed definite green progression. Plex appeared to have given up on life entirely, his gills moving sluggishly. Xena's crystalline structure had collected enough mineral deposits to require industrial cleaning. They gathered in miserable silence, waiting for Vector's promised sunrise evaluation, ready to admit defeat or at least negotiate terms of surrender. Then Crix's antenna perked up, pointing toward Marcus's location. "Where's the human?" They looked. There, elevated slightly above their position, stood a structure that definitely hadn't existed yesterday. A proper structure, with a peaked roof and walls and what appeared to be architectural planning. And inside, visible through the open front, Marcus sat cross-legged, looking dry and remarkably well-rested. Eating a ration bar like this was perfectly normal. The squad approached slowly, their collective disbelief palpable. Creeks reached out to touch the woven panels, his chitinous fingers tracing the intricate pattern. "This is how." Marcus swallowed his ration bar. "Reed cane. Grows about 200 meters that direction. Cut it, split it, weave panels, assemble frame. Basic technique, really. Takes a few hours if you know what you're doing." "A few hours," Torvald repeated flatly. His species' concept of time was somewhat fluid, but even accounting for translation, a few hours seemed inadequate for constructing actual architecture. "You built this last night, in the rain, in the dark." "Well, yeah, wasn't going to build it this morning, was I? Rain's not going away." Marcus gestured at the structure's interior. "Elevated platform keeps you off the mud. Overlapping panels shed water. Simple A-frame distributes weight evenly. It's not complicated." Zena's crystalline structure refracted morning light in patterns that suggested deep offense. "My species required 4,000 years to develop sophisticated shelter weaving. You're claiming this is simple. I mean, yeah, basket weaving, basically. My grandmother taught me when I was 8. Most human cultures figured out plant weaving pretty early. It's just, plants that grow in straight lines can be woven. Plants that can be woven can become structures. Structures keep rain off. Rain off means dry. Dry means comfortable." Seemed straightforward. The squad stared, then at each other, then back at Marcus, who was now casually demonstrating panel construction, splitting a reed cane stalk with his knife like he was peeling fruit. The weaving pattern materialized under his hands, strips interlocking, creating water-resistant fabric from individual pieces. "But this requires," Creeks struggled for words, "generational knowledge, inherited techniques, evolutionary adaptation. Requires grandma threatening to cancel Christmas if you don't pay attention." Marcus corrected. "Different motivation system, same results. Humans teach skills across generations. Someone figures something out, shows someone else, they show someone else. Eventually some idiot like me is weaving panels on an alien planet in a rainstorm. Cultural transmission, not biological." Plex's gills flared with what might have been comprehension, or possibly more congestion. "Your species passes survival techniques through social learning rather than genetic memory. Yours doesn't. How do you learn anything? Instinct, biological drives, genetic inheritance. The knowledge exists within our cellular structure." Marcus considered this. Well, that sounds way more efficient until you need to learn something your species didn't evolve doing. Then you're just wet and miserable." "Yeah." Before anyone could respond, Instructor Vector arrived with his evaluation team, prepared to assess failure and distribute criticism. He stopped mid-stride, his amphibious eyes widening, staring at Marcus's shelter like it had personally insulted him. "What?" Vector said slowly. "Is that?" "Shelter, sir. As ordered, improvised from available resources." "You made this, from what?" "Reed cane, sir. Local plant. Grows in dense stands near water sources. Structural properties make it ideal for weaving. Basic agricultural engineering application." Vector walked around the structure, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and what might have been respect, though it was hard to tell with Krell facial anatomy. He tugged on a panel. It held firm. He pushed against the frame. It didn't budge. He stuck his head inside, examining the elevated platform, the drainage system, the overall construction quality. "This is," Vector trailed off. This meets all structural requirements. Waterproof, elevated, sound construction. You fabricated this in 10 hours? About 4, sir. Spent the other 6 sleeping. Dry sleeping, which made quite a difference. The instructor's team exchanged looks. Their evaluation protocols covered many scenarios: recruits failing to build shelter, recruits building inadequate shelter, recruits building adequate but barely functional shelter. Nowhere in their protocols did it mention recruits constructing professional quality architecture from jungle plants using apparently ancient human techniques. Your species has genetic memory of shelter construction, one assistant instructor asked. No, sir, just regular memory. And stubbornness. Mostly stubbornness. Vector pulled out his evaluation tablet, scrolling through criteria, clearly searching for some regulation Marcus had violated. Finding none, he looked up with an expression suggesting he was reconsidering his career choices. Did you teach anyone else this technique? Hadn't gotten around to it, sir. Was tired. But I could if that's allowed. Within 2 hours, Marcus had become Squad Theta-9's unofficial architecture instructor, demonstrating reed cane harvesting and panel weaving to 4 fascinated aliens who were discovering that genetic memory had certain limitations. Crix's chitinous fingers struggled with fine manipulation, but eventually produced acceptable panels. Torval's scaled hands worked surprisingly well once he understood the pattern. Plex required adaptation for his webbed appendages, but managed. Even Xena, despite lacking traditional hands, figured out how to weave using crystalline protrusions. By midday, Squad Theta-9 had 5 functioning shelters, each slightly different, reflecting individual adaptation of Marcus's basic technique. By evening, word had spread to other squads, and Marcus found himself conducting impromptu workshops for increasingly desperate recruits who had spent the night discovering that genetic memory didn't include sudden architecture knowledge. Instructor Vector watched this development with complicated emotions. His training doctrine emphasized individual adaptation and species-specific survival strategies. Humans were supposed to be primitives, barely evolved from arboreal ancestors, lacking the sophisticated biological adaptations of proper species. Yet here was a human, casually teaching advanced survival techniques to species that considered themselves evolutionarily superior. The training manual had no protocol for this situation. Someone, Vector thought darkly, would be updating that manual. He approached Marcus that evening, watching the human demonstrate panel construction to a Thixian recruit who kept accidentally crushing stalks with excessive grip strength. Corporal Okonkwo. A word. Marcus excused himself, following Vector to a relatively private area, which on Kep 7 meant slightly less muddy than everywhere else. The instructor studied him with an expression that might have been respect or indigestion. With Krell faces, distinguishing between emotions remained challenging. Your performance exceeds expectations, Vector said finally. Significantly. The training parameters assumed humans would struggle with Phase 2. Instead, you've demonstrated remarkable adaptation and apparently teaching capability. Thank you, sir. This creates a problem. Marcus waited. Problems usually meant extra duty or creative punishment. He had violated no actual rules, but instructors possessed impressive creativity when regulations proved insufficient. The problem, Vector continued, is that you've invalidated my entire lesson plan. Phase 2 exists to teach recruits that comfort is temporary, that survival requires accepting discomfort. You've taught them that discomfort is merely a problem requiring practical solutions. This is accurate, but pedagogically inconvenient. Sorry, sir. Don't be. You've passed Phase 2 with distinction. Actually, you've passed it so thoroughly that I'm recommending you skip Phase 3 entirely. No point teaching advanced shelter construction to someone who independently discovered it in 4 hours using alien plants. Vector sighed, a bubbling sound. The other instructors are going to mock me endlessly. Defeated by a human and agricultural botany, I'll never hear the end of it. If it helps, sir, my grandmother would probably mock you too. She always said proper shelter was just applied stubbornness and pattern recognition. Your grandmother sounds terrifying. Absolutely, sir. But I learned a lot. Vector nodded slowly. Cultural knowledge transmission. We've studied the concept, but experiencing it proves humbling. Your species treats information as communal resource rather than individual inheritance. Every human potentially possesses knowledge from thousands of preceding generations, passed through teaching rather than genetics. Pretty much, yeah. Means we can adapt to stuff we didn't evolve for. Trade-off is we have to actually learn things instead of just knowing them, which honestly seems fair. The instructor was quiet for a moment, rain pattering against his amphibious skin. Between us, Corporal, off the record, most species in the coalition assume humans joined because you're desperate, because your technology lagged behind, because you needed protection. But skills like this, practical adaptation, creative problem-solving with limited resources, these have value beyond genetics or technology. Perhaps considerable value. Grandma would definitely agree, sir. Usually while whacking someone with a reed for sloppy weaving. I suspect I would have liked your grandmother. Vector turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Several other squads have requested your assistance with shelter construction. Normally, cross-squad collaboration is discouraged. However, given current meteorological conditions and the medical bay's capacity limitations, I'm authorizing it. Help who you can. Just don't make me look worse than you already have. I'll try to keep the mockery subtle, sir. Appreciated. Marcus spent the next 3 days conducting informal workshops across base Perseverance, teaching reed cane techniques to dozens of recruits representing 17 species. Some adapted quickly, others struggled with manual dexterity or conceptual understanding. A few simply lacked patience, which Marcus addressed by channeling his grandmother's teaching style, minus the reed whacking but plus pointed observations about their commitment to remaining dry. By week's end, base Perseverance had transformed. Woven shelters dotted the training area, each unique, reflecting individual interpretation of Marcus's basic technique. The medical bay's hypothermia cases dropped to 0. Morale improved substantially. Recruits stopped questioning why they had joined the IDC and started questioning why nobody had taught them plant weaving earlier. Instructor Vector filed his after-action report with careful phrasing, emphasizing adaptive learning outcomes while downplaying the part where a human agricultural engineer had accidentally revolutionized their survival training program. His superiors responded with approval, recommendations, and pointed questions about why this technique hadn't been incorporated into training protocols previously. Vector began updating the manual, adding sections on cultural knowledge transmission, cross-species skill sharing, and the apparently revolutionary concept of asking the human how they survived the thing that killed everyone else. Squad Theta-9 graduated survival training with honors. Creeks went on to specialize in field engineering, applying weaving techniques to rapid fortification construction. Torval integrated shelter knowledge into combat doctrine. Plex developed aquatic adaptations of the technique. Xena created crystalline reinforced panels that became standard issue for expeditionary teams. Marcus continued teaching, unofficially at first, then officially when the IDC established a cross-cultural survival skills program and needed instructors who understood both plants and how to threaten people into learning. Years later, Anthropologists studying the Interstellar Defense Coalition's evolution noted an interesting pattern. Starting in training year 247, sudden widespread adoption of plant-based shelter construction occurred across multiple species despite no genetic basis for such knowledge. This sparked debate about convergent cultural evolution until someone checked the actual records and discovered it was just one stubborn human refusing to sleep in the rain. The Interstellar Defense Coalition updated its recruitment materials accordingly, adding a line about how humanity's contribution to galactic defense included advanced combat tactics, strategic planning, and apparently several thousand years of figuring out how to weave plants into things. The marketing department debated whether "we can teach your species basket weaving" qualified as compelling advertising. They decided it did not, which showed disappointing lack of imagination but probably avoided confusion. Marcus retired eventually, returning to agricultural engineering, this time consulting on colony development across Coalition space. He specialized in sustainable construction using local materials, a niche field that became significantly less niche after people realized that alien planets rarely came with convenient hardware stores. His techniques spread through Coalition worlds, adapted and modified by hundreds of species, each adding their own innovations to the basic patterns his grandmother had taught him decades earlier, light years away, under threat of cancelled holidays. Instructor Vector also retired, though with considerably less fanfare and considerably more mockery from fellow instructors who never quite let him forget the time a human defeated his training program with bamboo and stubbornness. He took it philosophically, mostly, though he never again designed survival scenarios without first checking whether any humans in the group possessed inconvenient practical skills. His updated training manual became standard across the Coalition, cited thousands of times, and directly responsible for saving an estimated 12,000 lives over subsequent decades. The manual's introduction included a dedication to Corporal Marcus Okonkwo, who reminded us that evolution provides tools, but adaptation requires imagination. Also to his grandmother, who apparently taught basket weaving through intimidation. Both approaches have merit. Somewhere on Kep 7, probably, woven shelters still stood in the jungle, weathering storms, gradually decomposing back into the ecosystem, temporary structures that had served their purpose. The reed cane grew and grew, completely unaware it had accidentally participated in an interstellar cultural exchange. The rain continued falling, indifferent to shelter politics or species pride, or the ongoing argument about whether humans qualified as primitives when they kept solving problems everyone else found impossible. The jungle didn't care. The jungle just grew, following patterns established over millions of years, creating resources that someone someday somewhere would figure out how to weave into something useful. All it took was stubbornness, pattern recognition, and the willingness to get wet while figuring things out. And maybe a grandmother threatening to cancel Christmas. That probably helped too.